In the hush of a timeless dawn, long before the sun dared to break over the vast and golden land of Kemet, a gentle breeze moved across the still waters of the Nile. Its breath stirred the reeds and kissed the surface of the slow, sacred river, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and flowering lotus. This was a moment of calm, the brief hour before the day's burden descended once more upon the backs of the thousands whose lives were bound to stone, to sweat, and to silence. A boy, barely more than a shadow in the mist, knelt beside the water. His name was Paaten. At 13 summers he was thin but sinewed from work, skin browned and roughened by sun and sand. He scooped a handful of water to his lips, tasting the river's coolness, letting it slide down his throat like the last kindness of the morning. In the small village of Paaten, east of the river, life began early and ended late. Paaten's father, Harkoof, was already stirring behind him, the creak of woven matting and the low cough of dust-thick lungs whispering that the day's march was near. Their home, like all others around them, was of mud brick, warm in the night, baking in the sun, crumbling at the edges, yet shelter nonetheless. 3 people slept within: Paaten, Harkoof, and his mother, Senet. Though she rarely stirred now, her limbs ached too much. Her voice had grown thin as papyrus reeds. The faint, rhythmic tapping of distant wood told of neighbors readying their tools: wooden mallets, rope, and chisels made from copper softened by many days of use. A flock of ibises glided low over the fields, their white feathers momentarily bright in the rising light. The scent of baking bread drifted over the compound walls, flat loaves prepared by the women who stayed behind, while the men walked to the quarries. But this morning, something had shifted. Today would not be a day of quarry labor in the Red Cliffs. Today, Paaten would follow the men north, toward the great construction grounds near Mennefer. He had been chosen, by lot, by age, by the decree of the overseer's tall shadow the week before. His heart, which had once raced with pride, now fluttered with unease. "You will carry water," his father had said, "and watch, and learn. One day you will shape stone, but not today." Carrying water sounded simple, but the water carriers were never idle. They walked all day in lines, back and forth, under the eye of the foreman. Water was life for the laborers, and without it, the hands could not work, the stone would not yield, and the lash would crack. As the village gathered near the wooden carts drawn by oxen, Paaten felt the strange quiet that came with these mornings. The men did not laugh. They did not speak unless they must. There was only the sound of sandals on packed dirt, of clay pots clinking gently, and the dry cough of a child already grown too old. The journey to the building site was long, over. 6 miles through a land where sand swallowed the green edges of the Nile's blessing. Along the way, the sun climbed higher and the shadows grew smaller. The workers, farmers, fishermen, potters, and thatchers in other seasons walked with heads bowed, thoughts tucked deep inside. To pass the time, Paaten listened. The older, men sometimes whispered prayers to Ptah or Thoth, or muttered chants to ward off the desert spirits. Once, he heard a soft song from a man missing 2 teeth. The words almost like a lullaby for the earth itself. "Stone will rise, and I with it. Stone will rise." When they crested a low hill, the sight took Paaten's breath from his chest. There, rising from the earth like the spine of the gods, was the pyramid. Though still unfinished, its bulk dominated the horizon, white limestone catching the sun like a blade. Around it sprawled a city of labor, scaffolds of wood, ramps of mud brick and gravel, workers by the thousands moving like ants upon and around the gleaming beast. From this distance, it was silent, a painting. But Paaten knew, the moment they reached its foot, the air would be alive with shouts, with dust, with groaning ropes and creaking sledges. They were met at the edge of the workers' village by a man in a leopard skin sash, a scribe. His eyes passed over each arrival, making marks on a scroll of linen. Paaten gave his name his village, and his father's name. "You carry water," the man said without looking up. "Report to Hut 2, South Ramp, no delay." And so the boy's first day began. In the vast field of noise and motion, he found his place among other boys, each bearing jars tied with cord across their shoulders. They moved in pairs, one carrying full pots, one bringing empties back for refilling at the cisterns. The ground was cracked and dry, packed by endless feet. The air tasted of stone dust and sweat. He walked. He carried. He stumbled once and was struck, not by the lash, but by the calloused palm of a copper miner, turned watermaster. No words, just a nod that said, "Stand, move." Time blurred. The sun climbed and burned. And still he walked. At midday they were given a break, no more than a handful of figs, a heel of bread and a gourd of water. He sat in the shade of a stone block the size of a cart, letting the heat roll over him in waves. All around, men toiled, hundreds dragging sledges, chanting in rhythm, lashes curling through the air like striking serpents. But there was no cruelty in the air, only necessity, discipline, and the will to finish something far greater than any one of them. He watched, and he wondered, what kind of people built something so vast? Who ordered this work? And why? He would not yet learn the answers. But in that moment, as a breeze passed across his sweat-streaked face, he felt part of something older than the river. When the sun at last dipped behind the line of palm trees in the west, the work did not end with it. The light shifted, golden at first, then dim, and the shadows grew long across the scaffolded shoulders of the unfinished pyramid. Only then, when the foremen lowered their staffs and blew their horns of dismissal, did the workers begin their slow, weary retreat to the labourers' camp, a maze of shelters, fires, and silence. Paaten's feet throbbed with every step, his shoulders burned from the day's strain, his arms trembling from the weight of endless jars filled and emptied. Dust clung to his skin, thick like a second hide, and his tongue was dry despite the water he had poured for others. He followed his father through the rows of tents and huts built of palm stalks and scraps of cloth, all pitched close to the worksite for efficiency. Here, thousands of men and boys like him lived day after day, bound by duty, by law, and by something less easily named. A presence in the air, perhaps, that said they were part of history, whether they wished it or not. Their own shelter was little more than a lean-to, shaded by a tattered woven mat and framed with bent sticks. Harkuf dropped his tool pouch at the entrance and sat, legs stretched before him, not speaking. Paaten followed suit. His whole body ached. In time, others came. Workers from the ramps, the quarry slopes, the kitchens, and the stone polishers. They moved like ghosts, slow and silent, each carrying a story of the day not told aloud. The evening meal was handed out in a careful line, a bowl of lentils, a wedge of barley bread, and a cup of watered beer. Paaten ate with shaking fingers. The lentils were soft but gritty with sand, the bread stale but filling. The beer, warm and thin, tasted of earth and bitter herbs. Yet it comforted him, because it was something warm, and because it meant he had earned another night of sleep. Overhead, the sky darkened to deep blue, pierced by the first stars, points of white flaring cold above the desert. Somewhere beyond, the cluster of shelters, someone sang. It was a song of the field, not the stone, and its notes drifted like incense. May the barley rise tall, may the figs sweeten in the shade. Paaten lay back on the hard ground, head resting on his father's folded tunic. His bones hummed with fatigue, but his eyes would not close. Around him, the camp breathed in time with the stars. "Was I good?" he asked softly, unsure if his father was still awake. There was a pause. Then Harkuf answered, voice low and sandpaper rough. "You did not fall. You did not cry. You were good." It was all the praise Paaten needed. In that moment, under the slow-moving constellations that the priests said were boats of the gods, he felt something stir in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or something simpler, the knowledge that he had survived his first day and would rise again to face another. As sleep began to overtake him, his thoughts drifted. He thought of home, of his mother's quiet singing in the morning, of the date, palms near the village well, of the chickens that clucked along the courtyard wall. Would she be all right without him? Would the house feel emptier with both father and son gone? Did the priests still pass by each third day with prayers and salt? He thought of the pyramid too, that enormous mountain of stone rising steadily, day by day, by the strength of ordinary hands. It seemed less like a tomb and more like a living thing, one that fed on their sweat and hope and fear. He wondered what it would look like finished. Would he live to see it? The night passed slowly. The desert was not quiet. Crickets chirped, and far-off jackals called to one another. Occasionally, a man shouted in his sleep or coughed in fits. The fires crackled low, and the soft slap of guards' sandals moved through the camp like moths fluttering in circles. Some point before dawn, Paaten woke briefly. The stars had shifted. The air was cold enough to bite. He pulled his knees to his chest and listened to the breath of those around him. It sounded like the ocean he had never seen, steady, deep, and endless. The next morning came not with trumpets or horns, but with the soft, persistent calling of foremen rousing the sleepers. A shake to the shoulder, a barked name, a kick to the foot if needed. One by one, men rose and prepared for another day beneath the sun. No one complained. Complaints meant nothing here. The stones did not care for your mood. Harkuf stood and stretched his arms with a groan. Another 100 blocks today, they say. More if the Nile wind holds. Paaten rose, slower. His legs ached more now than the day before. But he did not say it aloud. They washed at the communal trough. Cold, brackish water from the river brought in jars each dawn. He splashed it on his face and let it run over his neck. It stung, but it woke him fully. Before setting out, Harkuf turned to him. Today, you stay on the west ramp. It is steeper, but cooler in the morning shade. Stay with the other boys. If you lose your jar, don't come back for it. They'll find another. Paaten nodded. He did not yet know what the west ramp looked like, but he would soon. He would know every curve and stone of it, every shout of the overseers, every dusty gust of wind that caught in the eyes. He picked up the clay jar he had left the night before, adjusted the cords around his shoulders, and followed his father, once more, into the living city of labor, into the belly of the great, slow-beating beast of stone and time. The west ramp was like a scar across the skin of the earth, a long, rising pathway carved from clay and gravel, packed tight by hundreds of laboring feet. It rose toward the pyramid at an angle both steep and relentless, framed by wood scaffolds and rope pulleys that swayed faintly in the morning wind. The sun had not yet reached its full strength, and the western face of the construction remained in a precious shadow, but the shadow brought no comfort for long. Paaten stood at the base of the ramp, clay jar in hand, staring up at the procession of labourers who already moved with purpose. The ramp was alive, men dragging sledges burdened with limestone, others pushing rollers beneath them, teams shouting in rhythm as they manoeuvred the stone toward its final resting place high above. He was not to carry stone, not yet, but water. Water was the lifeblood of it all. He followed the lead of a boy slightly older than himself, named Menwi. Thin and nimble, Menwi wore a linen wrap barely clinging to his frame, and his skin was permanently dusted in grey-white. Powder! He walked with quick steps, never faltering, despite the slope and the crowd. "Stay behind me," Menwi said without turning. "We move fast, or they shout. If they shout, they watch. If they watch, they remember. Don't be remembered. It was good advice." Together, they climbed the ramp, weaving between work crews and shouting foremen. The jar across Paaten's shoulders sloshed, full from the cistern near the base. Every 50 paces or so, they stopped. Menwi would unfasten his own jar and pour water into cupped hands, hands belonging to thirsty workers, thick with calluses, shaking with exertion. Some drank silently. Some whispered thanks. Some barely looked. Paaten mimicked him as best he could, watching where to step, how to lean, how to keep the jar steady despite the uneven slope beneath his feet. Higher up the ramp, the sun began to crest the edge of the pyramid's flank, spilling warmth over the workers in sudden waves. Sweat bloomed on Paaten's brow. His feet slipped once, caught by Menwi's hand before he could fall into the path of a passing sled. "Careful," Menwi muttered. "If you fall, you don't get up quick enough. They think you're weak." Paaten nodded, lips dry. The air was full of dust kicked up by dragging ropes and the scrape of stone. It clung to the throat like ash. They reached the upper platform and refilled the jars from a series of water basins, kept covered by leather cloth to stay cool. The overseer here gave them only a glance, but Paaten saw how his hand rested casually on the whip at his side, not from cruelty, but from constant readiness. Order was sacred here. Order built pyramids. As they made their way down again, Paaten dared to speak. "How long have you done this?" "Since the floods last year," Menwi answered without looking. "Father went to the gold mines, didn't come back, so I came here, better than the copper pits. You work there, your lungs rot." Paaten fell, silent, thinking of his father. Strong, patient, tired. Would he too someday vanish into the desert? By midday, the heat had become thick enough to feel like a blanket thrown over the whole site. The white limestone reflected it fiercely, and even the birds had retreated into the shadows of the scaffolds. Paaten's shoulders ached with a deep thudding pain, and his feet were raw. His legs trembled when he stood still too long. Yet he kept walking. Near the base of the ramp, he saw a man collapse. It happened quietly, without warning. One moment, the man was pulling a sled, chanting with his team. The next, he folded to the ground like a reed cut from its root. Shouts rose. Water was called for. Paaten stepped forward instinctively, but Menwi pulled him back. "No, let them." 2 men knelt beside the fallen worker. A third ran toward the tents. The overseer stood watching, whip still. After a moment, the collapsed man was lifted and carried away, his arms dangling limply. "Is he—" Paaten began. Menwi shrugged. "If he gets up later, he gets a short day. If not, someone else takes his place." There was no ceremony, no weeping, just a gap in the line, and then, minutes later, another man stepped into it, took up the rope, and pulled. By late afternoon, Paaten's eyes burned. His tongue was heavy. The line of water boys was thinner now. Some had been sent elsewhere, others had collapsed from the heat. But he stayed upright. He stayed moving. His feet knew the ramp now. His shoulders had found a rhythm, and his mind, though tired, was filled with fragments of questions. At one point, he passed his father near the middle of the slope. Harkuf did not speak, but their eyes met for a brief moment. In his father's gaze, Paaten saw no surprise, only quiet approval. That evening, when the sun fell behind the westward hills and the shadows stretched long again, he returned to the camp with Menwi. They walked slowly, neither speaking. The jars were empty, but their bodies still carried the weight of the day. At their shelter, Paaten found a gift waiting, flat bread wrapped in palm leaf, still warm, and a small slice of dried fig. His father had traded part of his meal for it. "You did well," Harkuf said simply. Paaten did not answer. Not. He sat down, ate, and closed his eyes. That night, sleep came fast and deep. The ache in his limbs was no longer pain. It was simply part of him now. Part of the pyramid, in a way. The rhythm of it, the silence of it, the quiet strength passed, from one generation to the next. As the stars wheeled overhead and the fires of the labor camp flickered like fallen constellations, Paaten slept, and dreamed not of stone, but of the river. The fourth day of labor began much like the third, with aching muscles, the crunch of sand beneath bare feet, and the scent of smoke rising from cook fires already cooling in the dawn. Yet something had changed. Paaten noticed it first in the hush of the camp. Less the usual murmur of tired men, more glances, more silence. When they joined the line toward the worksite, Menwi leaned close. "New overseers today," he whispered. "From Thebes. They say the vizier sent them. Inspectors." Paaten didn't fully understand what that meant, but he heard the tension in Menwi's voice. The usual overseers were hard but predictable. They enforced order with whip and voice, but rarely more. They watched the quotas, counted the loads, punished slackers, praised none. But outsiders, especially those sent from highborn courts, were a different sort of danger. The walk to the west ramp felt longer. Fewer jokes, fewer whispered songs. Everyone stood straighter, moved quicker. At the base of the ramp, the first sign of change appeared. A cluster of men in white linen robes stood just beyond the water basins. They were clean, unburdened. Their hands bore scrolls and wax tablets instead of rope burns or stone dust. One of them wore a leopard skin sash, reserved for priests and elite scribes, and another had a golden ring on each finger. They watched. They said nothing, but watched. The work resumed. Paaten and Menwi took their jars and moved along the usual path. But now the workers they served drank quickly and moved on faster. The chants of the sled teams were louder, more pronounced, as though daring the inspectors to find fault. Every task was done with sharper edges. An hour into the morning, a cry echoed across the site. A man had dropped a rope, letting a sled tip sideways, spilling its limestone block onto the ramp. The inspectors approached. One of them asked questions. The worker stammered, knelt in apology. Then came the sound of the whip. Not from the usual foreman, but from one of the new overseers. Young, sharp-eyed, his robe tucked at the waist. He struck not once, but 3 times, even as the man cried out and begged forgiveness. It was not the pain that shocked Paaten. Pain was part of the work. It was the silence that followed. The sudden stillness of the ramp as every man and boy looked away. Eyes on the ground, hearts tightened. Menwi said nothing. Neither did Paaten. They moved on, pouring water, stepping lightly. Later that day, the inspectors moved to the stone dressing yard. There, men worked with copper chisels and dolerite hammers, shaping the limestone blocks to precise angles. Dust rose in clouds. Sparks flew. Paaten saw a block inspected, measured, then marked, with a red cross, flawed. The man who shaped it was taken aside. Not whipped, not shouted at. He was dismissed. No one said where he went. His tools were taken. His name was scratched from the tally scroll. "He'll go to the quarries," Menwi muttered. "Or the copper pits. They don't kill you here, but they know how to make you vanish." By late afternoon, the mood had shifted. The inspectors no longer needed to raise their voices. Their presence was enough. The air was taut, like rope stretched too tight. Still, Paaten moved. He carried water. He listened. He noticed how the workers, on the high tiers of the pyramid, were quieter than those below. How the older men moved with less speed, but more certainty. He watched the stone polishers work, using sand and grit to smooth the white limestone until it gleamed. The light that struck those surfaces felt almost holy, but the weight of fear lay thick over the site now, woven into the dust. That evening, as the work ceased and the sun sank low again, Paaten returned to camp with a full jar still sloshing at his side. He hadn't made the final run. A foreman had waved him off early, muttering that the ramps were too crowded. Menwi walked beside him, slower than usual. "They say one of the inspectors is the son of the vizier himself," he said, voice low. "Come to see if the pharaoh's dream is kept pure. They believe this pyramid must be perfect." Paaten glanced back at the silhouette of the pyramid in the distance, its sides jagged but rising still, layer upon layer. "Why must it be perfect?" he asked. "Because it holds the body of a god," Menwi answered. "That's what they say." But Pharaoh is a man, Menwi shrugged. A man becomes more when he dies. That's what they say too. At their shelter, they found Harkuf, already sitting in the dust, his face streaked with sweat and grime. He looked at his son with a tired gaze and said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, "Be careful tomorrow." The inspectors return. That night, the fires in the camp seemed dimmer. Fewer voices spoke. Even the guards walked more slowly. Paaten lay awake long after the others had slept, staring at the sky above. The stars were quiet. The breeze was warm. He thought about the man who had been dismissed, about the block with the red mark, about the whip. In the stillness, he whispered a prayer, not to Ptah or Osiris, but to the pyramid itself. He didn't know why, but it felt right. Let me stay. Let me not be seen. And the pyramid, silent as always, said nothing in reply. Morning returned, not with golden warmth, but with a restless wind that stirred the dust long before the light. It whispered through the rows of shelters, rattling palm frond roofs and brushing dry fingers along the backs of sleeping workers. Paaten opened his eyes to the sky, pale and endless, already holding the weight of the sun not yet risen. He sat up slowly, joints stiff from sleep on hard earth. His father was gone, risen early, as he often did. No bread this morning, only a small handful of dried lentils and the remains of a bitter onion. Paaten chewed in silence, listening to the low murmur of men preparing themselves for another day of toil and shadow. The overseers were earlier today, their voices sharper. The inspectors had returned. At the ramp's base, the air already shimmered with tension. The white-robed visitors stood in quiet conversation with the scribe, their gestures small but deliberate. Paaten saw the golden rings again, glinting like small suns on the hands of the youngest inspector. Menwi nudged him. Today, they'll walk the ramp, watch every layer. They don't trust the workers. They trust the pyramid. But they do not trust us to be part of it. Paaten felt those words settle in his chest. He had not realized until now how much of this place, this life, rested on being invisible, to work, to serve, to endure, but not to be noticed. Today, they would be noticed. The work began as usual, but with fewer voices, fewer chants. The laborers pulled and pushed in tense silence, only the ropes and sledges making their rough music across stone and ramp. The copper chisels rang more sharply in the shaping yard, each strike deliberate and precise. Paaten moved with Menwi up the ramp, his jar freshly filled. The clay was warm against his back already. He focused on his footing, his rhythm, the feel of the jar's sloshing weight balancing across his shoulders. At the midpoint of the ramp, they encountered the inspectors. They stood beside a set of polished stones, comparing marks on a scroll with the blocks themselves. One of them gestured for a scribe to approach. They murmured something about symmetry, alignment, weight, and then the younger inspector's gaze fell on Paaten. He did not speak. He only raised one hand slightly. Paaten froze. "Boy," came a voice, not cruel, but firm. "Come here." Paaten stepped forward slowly, head low, jar cradled carefully. "What is your name?" the man asked. "Paaten," he said, his voice hoarse from dust and dryness. "From where?" "Pernebet, along the river." The inspector stepped closer, eyeing the boy's posture, the jar he carried, the sweat on his brow. "You carry water?" "Yes, noble one." "Have you dropped any?" "No." "Have you given it first to your elders?" "Yes." The inspector was quiet. Then strangely, he knelt, not fully, but low enough to look Paaten in the eye. "Do you know what this is we build?" Paaten hesitated. "A house for the pharaoh." "No," the inspector said, almost gently. "It is the spine of time. This will stand longer than your name, longer than your village, longer than the river itself. Do you understand that?" Paaten didn't fully understand, but he nodded. The inspector rose, turned without another word, and walked on. The moment passed like a cloud, leaving behind only the pounding of Paaten's heart. Menwi caught up to him later. You're lucky. He talked to you. Was it lucky? Paaten asked. Menwi shrugged. If they remember your name, they watch your feet and your hands. The rest of the day unfolded in waves of heat and rhythm. Paaten returned to the base, refilled his jar, made the climb again. Each time he passed the place where the inspector had spoken, he kept his head lower. He saw one man removed from the shaping yard, his chisel deemed too dull, his edge too slow. Another, reprimanded for uneven mortar. No lashes today, but the silence was heavier than blows. By late afternoon, the inspectors moved on. Their scrolls rolled tight, their eyes unreadable. The ramp exhaled a long breath. The workers moved a little more freely again. Chants returned. Whispers resumed. That night, Paaten found his father in better spirits. They're gone tomorrow, Harkov said. Their scrolls are full. What will they do with them? Read them in temples, send them to the pharaoh's court, tell of our hands, our errors, our worth. Paaten sat down beside him, exhausted. An inspector spoke to me, he said quietly. Harkov turned, his brow rising. What did he say? Paaten repeated the words about the spine of time. His father was silent for a moment. He's right, he said. We build more than stone. We build memory. The fire crackled softly between them. The camp was quieter than usual, as if all were reflecting, somehow, on the invisible scrolls written in sweat and silence. Above, the stars returned to their slow drift. The wind carried with it the scent of the Nile far away, and in the warmth of the fire's light, Paaten felt, for the first time, a strange sense of pride, not in himself, but in the shared endurance of the many who built what they would never see finished. Men who shaped stone not for glory, but because it was what they were called to do. They would not be remembered by name, but perhaps, if the pyramids stood long enough, their shadows might. It was the 6th morning since Paaten had begun his journey into the world of the stone. The sun rose slowly over the desert plain, soft at first, then sharp, gilding every surface in gold. The dust, always present, danced like mist through the beams of light, cloaking the camp and ramp in a veil of soft motion. But something was different today. The inspectors were gone, their clean robes, their sharp eyes, their silent judgments, absent. What remained was the familiar rhythm of daily work, the voices of foremen calling out assignments, the creak of oxen pulling carts toward the base, and the quiet shuffling of men and boys preparing for another day of burden. And with their departure, a calm had settled over the workers. Not joy, not relief, but a certain steadiness, like a boat freed from a strong current. Paaten moved with more confidence now. His shoulders still ached. His feet were blistered, but the path of the ramp no longer felt foreign beneath him. He could predict its curves, feel the places where footing was slippery, where shadows stretched long or vanished quickly. He knew the rhythms of the work teams, the deep breaths they took before the haul, the muttered chants that kept time as they pulled together. There was beauty in it, strange and hidden. Menwi was quieter than usual this morning, focused on the task at hand. They filled their jars, made their way to the upper slopes, poured water into cracked hands and onto chapped lips. And between those moments, they watched. They watched the men chisel stone, not with force, but with precision, tapping away slivers until the block became perfect in form. They watched sledges groan under weight, sliding on slickened mud paths over wooden rollers, directed by dozens of synchronized men. They watched as lines of workers moved as one, shoulders squared, chants echoing through the scaffolded spaces. No one gave orders loudly. They didn't need to. The system worked like a breath, in and out, seamless and ancient. It was there, in that soft hum of labor, that Paaten began to understand something he hadn't seen before. These men, his father, Menwi, the others, were not merely tools in a grand design. They were the design. They were what made the pyramid possible. Without their backs, their minds, their skill, The stone would remain piled rubble, not a monument. As they reached the middle tier of the west ramp, Paaten and Menwi paused to rest, leaning against a partially set limestone block. The stone was cool despite the heat, still holding the chill of early dawn. Menwi broke a bit of dried date from his satchel and offered half. Paaten accepted. "Do you think," Menwi asked, mouth full, "that they'll tell stories about us one day?" Paaten chewed, thought, then shook his head. "Not by name. Not even the brave ones. Especially not them," Paaten said, his voice steady. "Bravery isn't what they want remembered." Menwi frowned. "Then what is?" Paaten looked out across the ramp to the shimmering edge of the river in the far distance, and the lines of men walking steadily up and down the slope. "They'll remember that it stood, that it didn't fall." Menwi nodded slowly. "That's something, I guess." Later that day, Paaten saw an older man, perhaps in his 40th summer, a rare age among labourers, teaching a younger one how to prepare the rollers used beneath sledges. The lesson was quiet, deliberate. He pointed, demonstrated, waited for the boy to repeat. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he speak down. It was a passing of knowledge, not just technique. It struck Paaten how often such moments went unseen. The foreman measured output. The scribes recorded weight and number. But dignity, that lived in the hands, in the shared looks, in the silence, between blows of the hammer. That evening, as the workers returned to the camp in small groups, Paaten walked a little slower. He took time to watch the sky change from blue to copper to dark velvet. The desert wind stirred the edges of tents and made low music in the distance. Back at the shelter, his father was waiting with a small fish he had traded for with a worker from the river ferry. It was roasted simply, placed on a flat stone with some barley. Paaten sat close, hunger quieted by fatigue. "You move like someone who belongs now," Harkuf said, tearing a piece of bread. "I don't feel like a stranger anymore," Paaten admitted. His father nodded. "That's the beginning, when the work becomes part of your body, not just your hands." Paaten looked at his fingers, calloused and raw in places. He thought of the ramp, the jars, the quiet glances, and the songless work. "I saw a man teaching. Today," he said, without shouting, just showing, like a father. "Good men do that," Harkuf replied, "even if they're not remembered for it." A silence followed, not uncomfortable, just still. Then softly, from somewhere in the dark camp beyond, a voice began to sing. Not a chant of labour or a song of worship, but a lullaby, slow and low, sung in the old tongue of river villages. It spoke of the moon in the water, of papyrus swaying, of the long return home. Paaten closed his eyes. He imagined the pyramid finished, not as a tomb, but as a mountain of memory. Each stone a name not written. Each layer a breath taken in dust and strength. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether inspectors would return, whether his body would falter, whether the river would rise or fall, but he knew this. The pyramid rose because they did not fall, and that would be enough. The seventh day came not with the usual summons of work, but with a rare stillness. No horns, no barked orders, no creaking of ropes, or the grind of stone on stone. The camp woke slowly, blinking into a morning unlike any Paaten had yet known. The foreman did not shout. The overseers did not pace, and the ramp stood quiet like a sleeping giant, unmoved. Paaten sat up and rubbed his eyes. Around him, others did the same. Men rising slowly, stretching limbs not to labour, but simply to feel them. Whispers passed between shelters. Some laughed softly. Others prayed. Menwi approached with a small smile and 2 cups of barley water. "It's Opet," he said simply, offering one to Paaten. "The priests march through Thebes today. Pharaoh rides the river from Karnak to Luxor, so we rest." Paaten had heard of Opet, though never seen it. It was a time of celebration and renewal, when the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were honoured with great processions. Pharaoh, said to be Amun's own son, would visit the temples, his presence renewing the life of the kingdom. But the builders of stone did not march in that procession. They did not watch the grand boats or hear the chants of the sacred songs echo through the painted halls. Still, they felt its shadow. For one day at least, the lash was silent, and the stone was still. Some workers used the time to wash clothes, to sharpen tools, or to mend sandals. Others gathered near the center of the camp where a fire had been lit. Paaten followed Menwi there, drawn by the rare sound of laughter. A group of older workers were telling stories, some true, some not. One spoke of crocodiles so large they could swallow boats. Another claimed to have seen a falcon with eyes like rubies. A third told of a scribe who once copied a spell so powerful the papyrus itself caught fire. Paaten listened, smiling quietly. The stories were simple, but the telling of them mattered more than the truth they held. They were a balm, a binding thread between men who usually spoke only through grunts and gestures. He noticed his father sitting nearby, legs crossed, head tilted toward the fire. Harkuf's face was easier today, less weighed down. A thin strip of linen tied back his hair. He looked for a moment like a younger man. "Did you celebrate Opet in Pernabet?" Paaten asked, moving to sit beside him. Harkuf nodded. "Once. There was a priest who travelled by boat each year. He came with perfumes and salt, and we gave offerings of figs. Your mother made lotus bread. You were too young to remember." "I remember the smell of the smoke," Paaten said softly. Harkuf looked at him. "You remember more than you know." As the sun climbed, the camp remained in ease. A few boys played a game with stones and carved sticks. Others dozed under makeshift canopies, their snores light and undisturbed. No one moved toward the pyramid. It was as though the great monument had become invisible, paused in its own breath. In the afternoon, a group of singers passed through the center of the camp. 3 women in linen robes, escorted by a temple servant. They carried small harps and flutes made from reeds. Their songs were not of labor or glory, but of the river, the harvest, and the turning of seasons. Paaten had never heard such music so close. The melodies were slow and circling like the current of the Nile at its gentlest. The words were soft, old, worn smooth by use. One song spoke of wheat fields in the wind, of children running through tall grass, of hands dipped in water warmed by the morning sun. Paaten closed his eyes and listened. Around him, the camp sat in stillness, spellbound. For a brief time, they were not labourers, not carriers of water or pullers of sledges. They were simply people, fathers, sons, friends. When the music ended, the singers bowed and left quietly. No applause, only gratitude in the form of silence. As twilight fell, a warm breeze moved through the camp, lifting dust in spirals. Fires were lit again, and food was shared more freely. A man from the copper yard passed around dried apricots he had saved. Another shared pickled fish. Someone opened a jar of fermented honey wine, and the cup passed hand to hand. Paaten tasted it for the first time, sweet and sharp, like fruit left too long in the sun. It made his cheeks warm and his tongue loose. That night, under a sky filled with stars more brilliant than any torch, Paaten and Menwi lay side by side outside their shelter. The air was cooler, the breeze steady. "Do you ever think of leaving?" Paaten asked, voice quiet. "Where would I go?" Menwi replied. "Back to the river, to a place without stone." Menwi was silent for a long moment. Then, "Even there, you still carry something. Better to carry what builds." Paaten turned his head and looked at the silhouette of the pyramid, rising like a dream in the distance, its sides glowing faintly in moonlight. "I think," he said slowly, "it remembers us, even if no one else does." Menwi smiled in the dark. "That's enough, isn't it?" And with that thought resting softly in his mind, like linen against skin, Paaten drifted into sleep. The day of Opet passed, and with it, a small, precious, Reminder that even in the dust there is dignity, and even in silence there is song. The stillness of Opet faded with the stars. By dawn the next day, the camp had resumed its steady breath, the hush of celebration replaced by the shuffle of sandals and the creak of rope being gathered. There was no need for commands. Everyone knew the rhythm would return. The pyramid had waited, patient but demanding, and now the stones would move again. Yet for Paaten, this day began differently. As he stood readying his jar at the water trough, a foreman approached, an older man, with a scar down one cheek and a voice like worn leather. "You, Paaten, son of Harkoof." "Yes, sir," he said, setting his jar down. "You're needed in the quarry. A runner, not a carrier today. The master cutter has sent for fresh eyes." Paaten's brow furrowed. The quarry was not a place boys went lightly. It was the raw womb of the pyramid, the place where the earth itself was cut open to feed the monument. But he did not protest. He nodded and followed. The walk took them far from the ramps and scaffolds, beyond the workers' village and the storage yards. The land grew more rugged, the sand dotted with broken stone and discarded tools. Then, like a wound in the earth, the quarry opened before them. It was vast, a wide, sunken pit, with steps cut into the sides, leading down to the heart of stone. Men worked in the heat and dust below, hammering with dolerite balls, cracking lines with wedges, levering huge blocks from the bedrock. The sound was a rhythm of strikes and echoes, louder than any chant, deeper than any song. The foreman led Paaten to a man near the edge, tall and lean, with a copper chisel tucked into his belt and hands blackened by years of stonework. "This is Menka," the foreman said. "Master cutter, you follow him today. Watch, learn." Menka didn't look up at first. He knelt beside a row of etched lines in the rock, measuring with a piece of cord and a plumb bob. Then he stood, eyes sharp and quick. "You've carried water." "Yes?" "Good. That means you listen." "Can you run?" "Yes." "Better. That means you can learn." Without another word, Menka gestured for Paaten to follow. They descended into the quarry, the air growing warmer and heavier with every step. Paaten breathed through his mouth, already tasting the dry bitterness of powdered stone. They passed men working in pairs, one holding a chisel, the other striking with a wooden mallet. Others poured water into carved grooves, causing the stone to expand and crack along fault lines. Every action was precise, every sound purposeful. "This," Menka said as they walked, "is where the pyramid begins. Not at the ramp, not at the temple. Here, with stone still dreaming of silence." Paaten watched closely. He was told to carry messages between cutters, between toolmasters, from the scribe who tracked the yield of each day's cut. He learned quickly which paths were safest, which stones were unstable, which men preferred not to be interrupted. At midday, he sat with Menka beneath the shade of a canvas awning. "You don't speak much," Menka said. "I'm watching." "Good. The stone doesn't care for talk either." They shared a strip of dried meat and a piece of barley cake. Menka drank water from a jar wrapped in soaked linen to keep it cool. "Do you know what makes a block good?" he asked. Paaten thought for a moment. "No cracks. The right size?" Menka nodded. "Yes, but more. A good block sings when struck. It hums, not too loud, not too flat. You learn the song, and then you find the next one." Paaten looked at the tools lying nearby. The dull grey hammerstones, the chisels, the wedges of acacia wood used to split stubborn seams. Simple tools, ancient tools. Yet with them, the mountain moved. That afternoon, Paaten was sent to the far side of the quarry to retrieve new wedges. The walk was long, and the sun pressed hard upon his shoulders. When he returned, sweat dripping into his eyes, Menka nodded. "You didn't drop them. That's something." It was a small thing. But in the quarry, small things were noticed. By day's end, Paaten's legs were sore from climbing the carved steps. his ears ringing with the sound of constant labor. But his heart felt steadier. He had seen the bones of the pyramid. As the workers climbed from the quarry and began the trek back to camp, Menka walked beside him. "You'll return here," he said. "You see more than you speak. That's good." Paaten glanced back once, at the darkening pit behind them. The stone below glowed faintly in the dying light, veins of it shining like old ivory. That night, Paaten ate beside his father, who listened carefully to the recounting of the day. "The quarry," Harkuf said, whistling low. "You must have impressed someone." "I didn't do much," Paaten replied. "I just ran." "You ran where others couldn't. That's something." Sleep came slowly that night, not from restlessness, but from the weight of learning. Paaten's dreams were filled with echoes, not of voices, but of hammers on stone, of cracks splitting through silence, of the breath of the earth itself, and deep, within those dreams, a whisper. Find the next one. By the 9th sunrise, the world beneath Paaten's feet had become familiar in ways he had never imagined. The quarry, once a terrifying wound in the earth, was now a place of rhythm, of knowledge, of voices that spoke in fewer words but carried more meaning. He returned there without being told, as if drawn by something older than duty. Menka greeted him with a nod and handed him a fresh length of cord. "You measure today," he said. "Not the big cuts, just these. Follow the line. Keep it true." Paaten took the cord with careful fingers, tracing the groove etched into the stone. The line was faint but deliberate, drawn in red ochre by a master cutter to guide the next strike. It curved gently along the natural seam in the limestone, respecting what the earth already wanted to give. That was the first lesson Paaten had come to understand. The stone did not surrender by force. It yielded when asked properly. He worked, slowly, stretching the cord taut, marking each section with small pebbles. Around him, the quarry echoed with labour. Mallets rang against chisels. Stone cracked along pre-marked lines. Dust rose in soft grey clouds, carried by the occasional breeze that curled through the pit. Menka watched him, arms crossed. "Not too tight," he said once. "Let the cord follow the stone." Paaten adjusted, nodded. At midday, Menka summoned him to the base of a deep groove where two men worked to remove a half-loosened block. It was a large one, perhaps for the inner chambers, where precision mattered more than size. The wedge had been soaked. The cracks had widened. It was nearly free. "Tell me," Menka said, "where will it fall?" Paaten studied the angles, the slope of the chiseled base, the lean of the block against the wall behind it. "To the left," he answered. Menka grunted approval. "Good. Now stand clear." The block gave way moments later with a deep, muffled thud. Dust exploded into the air, and a cheer rose from the cutters. Another stone born. Another weight passed from the earth to man. Later, Paaten sat beside a cracked slab near the quarry's edge, wiping dust from his arms. Menka approached and sat with him, chewing on a piece of palm heart. "You think this is just labour?" the cutter asked. "Just cuts and pulls and sweat?" Paaten shook his head. "No, it's something more." Menka pointed to the pile of freshly carved blocks. "That's not just rock. That's memory. That's time made solid. You carve it wrong, you make a scar. You carve it right, and it sings." It was the second time someone had used that word, sings. Paaten didn't yet understand it fully, but he believed it. He began to recognize things that had once gone unnoticed. The way a particular tool made a finer edge, the slight change in tone when a chisel struck dry stone versus damp, the way silence deepened when a block was ready to be lifted. And there were the men themselves. One, named Nebamun, sang quietly as he worked. Simple tunes, not unlike the lullabies his mother once sang. Another, tall and gaunt, spoke to the stone before, each strike whispering as though asking permission. They were not priests, not scribes, yet there was a kind of sacredness in their manner. Paaten learned to refill their water, to fetch wedges when they snapped, to to listen for the moment when the stone groaned and moved. He was not strong, but he was swift, and they began to rely on his presence without question. "You see," Menka said one afternoon, "most boys break here. Too much noise, too much dust. They run back to the ramp. But you listen." "I want to understand it," Paaten said softly. "Then you will." That night, back in camp, Paaten barely touched his food. His thoughts were filled with lines of ochre, with the steady hands that coaxed shape from rawness. He sat beside his father, who said little, but watched him with eyes that seemed to understand more than they revealed. "You're changing," Harkuf said at last. "I'm learning," Paaten replied. "Good. Don't forget what you learn here, even when the stone forgets you." He didn't sleep easily that night. His body ached in new places, not from jars or stairs, but from kneeling, long in the heat, from carrying ideas as much as tools. In his dreams, the quarry became a riverbed. Stones swam like fish beneath its surface, and he walked barefoot across them, guided by lines drawn in red. Voices followed him, soft and slow, repeating a phrase he did not yet understand. "Measure true. Shape gently. Let the earth remember." By the 10th day, Paaten's feet moved with instinct. He knew the worn stone paths between the quarry's ledges, recognized the sharp tones of each foreman's voice, and could distinguish the groan of a cracking block from the echo of hammer strikes. The quarry had become a classroom with no walls. Each breath of dust another lesson, each footstep another test. He was learning fast. And so was the pyramid. It rose not by magic, but by the endless choreography of labor. Stone carved, stone moved, stone set, and always watched. Not by the gods, not just by the foreman, but by the pyramid itself, which seemed to breathe as much as the men did. The morning began as others had. Paaten met Menka at the lower cuttings, where lines were being measured for a new set of core blocks. The workers were quiet, already coated in a fine mist of powder. Menka's face was darker with dust, his eyes alert. "We moved 2 large blocks today," he said. "High quality. Watch how the team handles them. If you want to shape stone, first see how it lives." The first block, nearly the size of a cart, was already cut free. It rested on a bed of sand and rounded pebbles, waiting to be hauled up the quarry slope. 20 men would pull it using thick ropes, while others guided its path with levers and cries. Paaten stood at the edge, heart steady, eyes wide. The pull began well. The rope creaked under the strain, taut as a bowstring. The block shifted slowly, inch by inch, guided by careful commands. A chant began, slow and low, keeping time. One pull, one breath, one shout. Paaten watched from the side, ready to run errands, to fetch tools if called. The block inched upward, but then, a sound like thunder, sharp, final. The rope snapped. It didn't fray. It didn't unwind. It broke in a single violent moment. The block slipped. The chant broke. A man screamed. The stone, massive and mindless, slid back down the slope and crushed the leg of a worker who hadn't moved in time. Blood soaked the dust. The man writhed. Others shouted, rushing forward, hands waving, eyes wide. "Stop the pull! Stop it!" Menka was there first, kneeling beside the injured man. Paaten watched, frozen, as cloth was wrapped tight around the mangled limb. The man's face was pale, his eyes wild. The block rested mere inches from his body. Paaten forced his feet forward. His breath came fast. He knelt beside the cutters. "What can I do?" "Fetch the scribe," Menka said. "Quickly, and bring more cloth." Paaten ran, legs pounding against stone and sand, dust flying. He found the scribe's tent beyond the edge of the quarry and delivered the message breathlessly. The scribe followed, scroll in hand, lips pursed. By the time they returned, the man had stopped moaning. He was conscious, but barely. The workers had cleared the path around the block. The rope lay coiled, useless. No one spoke. The scribe knelt, checked the man's vitals, and began to write. He marked the hour, the names, the block number, the rope team, the failure. The worker's name was Hotep, a thatcher's son from the Delta. He had come to the quarry 6 seasons ago. He would not return to the ramp again. A cart was brought. Hotep was lifted, slowly, gently, into its bed. He did not scream. He had no more strength to. The cart rolled away, headed for the physician's tent beyond the builder's camp. Menka stood in silence, the broken rope in his hands. He turned to the rest of the workers. "We begin again," he said. "Check the new rope. Sand the path. The stone waits for no one. The block would be moved by noon." That evening, back in the camp, the mood was different, softer, heavier. The men sat closer to their fires, more subdued in their speech. A few whispered about Hotep. Others stared at their food. Paaten sat beside his father, knees pulled to his chest. "It happened fast," he said. "It always does," Harkuf replied. "Could he have moved? Maybe, maybe not. Some blocks choose their own way. It wasn't meant cruelly. Just the truth." "Will he live?" Paaten asked. Harkuf was quiet for a long time. Then, "They may take the leg. That's mercy. If the fever comes..." He didn't finish the sentence. Paaten nodded slowly. The fire crackled beside them, the smoke rising in spirals toward the stars. "I don't want to be afraid," he said. "You can't avoid fear," Harkuf answered. "You only decide how it walks beside you." That night, Paaten dreamed of rope and stone, of the moment just before the snap, when everything still held. He saw the pyramid as it would be, smooth, immense, eternal, and wondered how many names were buried in its silence, not in chambers or scrolls, but in cracks and shadows, in blood turned to dust. In the morning, the rope would be stronger, but the silence would be deeper. The morning after the rope snapped, the air over the camp was unusually heavy. The wind had stilled, and even the birds that often darted near the river's edge kept quiet. Dust hung in the sky like smoke, unmoving. Paaten awoke with the sound of Hotep's scream still lingering somewhere between his chest and throat. He dressed in silence. Today, he was not needed at the quarry. Menka had told him the night before, his voice low. "Go to the healer's tent. Learn how we mend what the stone breaks." So he walked past the ramp, past the scaffolds and the carts, past the workers gathered in their quiet morning routines. The healer's tent stood near the edge of the labourers' village, marked by a bundle of dried lotus hanging above the entrance and the faint smell of herbs. Inside, the air was thick with steam and smoke. It was cooler than the sunlit camp, but filled with the scent of crushed garlic, bruised mint, and something more bitter, resin from acacia bark and boiled myrrh. The tent was dark, lit only by slivers of sunlight that cut through gaps in the linen walls. Matting covered the floor. Earthen jars and reed baskets lined the perimeter, filled with salves, bandages, and tools of bone and copper. The healer, a tall woman with greying braids and a face etched by wind and wisdom, turned as he entered. Her name was Sahti. "You're the quarry boy," she said. "Not unkindly." "I am," Paaten answered. "Menka sent me. He said I should learn what happens after." Sahti nodded and pointed to a low stool. "Sit. Watch. When I need you, I'll say." The first patient was a boy younger than Paaten, bitten by a scorpion near the hay store. His arm had swelled and turned red. Sahti spoke softly, grinding herbs with a stone bowl, mixing them with goat milk. She bound the boy's arm and sang, to him as he trembled, not loudly, just a low murmur, rhythmic and old. "The song distracts the blood," she explained. Next came an older man with a cough that shook his whole body. She gave him warm beer mixed with honey and poppy, then rubbed a dark salve into his chest. When he left, she looked to Paaten. "Hold this," she said, passing him a clay jar. "Myrrh, for the one who cannot sleep. And then Hotep arrived. He was carried on a stretcher of palm branches, wrapped in linen soaked through with old blood. His eyes were closed. His face was pale and sunken. Paaten froze. Sati did not. "Set him down," she told the bearers, then knelt beside the crushed leg. Her hands moved quickly, lifting the cloth, pressing around the wound, sniffing the edges of rot. She muttered a prayer under her breath, not to the gods, but to the flesh. "He has not eaten," she said, "and the fever has come." Paaten stepped closer, the jar of myrrh still in his hands. "Do we cut it?" he asked, voice small. "If we cut it now, he may not survive the night. If we do not, the fever will climb into his belly." She looked at him then, eyes dark and calm. There are no easy choices under stone. They worked together. Sati grinding more herbs, mixing honey with powdered charcoal, heating copper tools over a flame. She taught Paaten to clean cloth with vinegar, to pack wounds with damp linen, to watch the colour of the skin for change. Hotep moaned once in pain, and Paaten instinctively reached for his hand. It was hot, limp and trembling. He stayed like that for hours, kneeling beside the man, wiping sweat from his brow, whispering the same chant Sati had used earlier. "Stone will rise. Stone will rise." Hotep did not reply, but Paaten thought he saw his eyelids flutter once. By late afternoon, the fever had not broken. Sati sat on a mat beside her jars and looked long at the dying light through the flap of the tent. "Sometimes," she said, "we bind the wound, but the spirit lets go anyway. The stone does not forgive, but it forgets." That evening, Paaten returned to his shelter slowly. His father was waiting, as always, sitting by the small fire. "You were with the healer," Harkuf said. "Yes." "Did he live?" "I don't know yet." Harkuf poked the fire with a stick, the sparks rising like stars. "When I was young, I saw a man lose both legs under a block. The healer came, did all she could. He sang until the sun went down. Then he stopped." Paaten didn't speak. He stared into the flames, thinking of Hotep's pale face and the quiet chant. "I don't want to die here," he said. His father turned, meeting his eyes. "Then live here, not just work, learn, breathe, look. Even if no one remembers, even then." That night, sleep did not come easily. The healer's tent lingered in Paaten's thoughts. The smell of resin, the sound of blood-soaked linen being unwrapped, the silence after pain. And yet, as he drifted, a thought came soft and slow. Every hand that saves builds something too. Not with stone, but with care. The 12th day began with a low fog clinging to the earth, a rare veil that softened even the harsh outline of the pyramid's rising form. Paaten rose early, his limbs sore from crouching the day before, but his mind still echoing with the whispers and wounds from the healer's tent. Hotep had survived the night. Sati had told him quietly at dawn as she cleaned her tools and refreshed the linen bandages. The fever had broken. The leg would never be whole again, but the man would live, and in this place, that alone was a triumph. Paaten returned to the quarry with a new kind of awareness in his steps. He was not just moving towards stone. He was returning to a family of labourers bound by more than rope and task. Bound by the quiet knowledge that life, fragile as it was, continued breath by breath in the hands of those who did not look away. At the edge of the quarry, Menka greeted him without words. He simply pointed to a rising path where the stone was ready for cutting. Today, they worked with the master line scribes, men who did not strike the rock, but painted it. Their brushes were thin reeds dipped in coloured slurry, ochre, black soot, and white lime. Each stone received its own marks before it was shaped, lines that told the cutters how deep to chisel, where to split, where the fault ran. It was as if the scribes read the mind of the mountain. Paaten watched one named Kai, an older man with a bent back and long fingers. His eyes were pale with age, but his lines never faltered. He hummed as he painted, a strange melody without words. Paaten approached carefully. "Why do you sing when you work?" Kai glanced up, his smile as fine as his brush. "Because stone listens to the song, to the hand that sings through it." He waved Paaten closer. "Come, hold this jar." Paaten did as told, watching the man dip his reed and draw a curve along the face of the limestone. The line followed the grain of the stone like a river curling through sand. The earth gave this shape. "I only reveal it," Kai said. That day, Paaten learned the signs. The curved line meant to chisel lightly. A triangle meant a fault lay beneath. Crossed lines meant a block was not to be moved until checked again. He watched Kai paint each symbol with reverence. "It's like writing," he said. "It is writing," Kai replied, "but not for scribes, for the hands who build. Our stories are not told in scrolls. They are carried in weight and whisper." Later, he met another cutter, Beck, who had worked the quarry for over 20 seasons. Beck had arms like tree trunks and eyes as sharp as obsidian. Yet he spoke with softness, telling Paaten how each tool had its own sound, how every stone gave a different song. "Strike too hard," Beck said, "and it cracks wrong. Strike too soft, and it mocks you," he demonstrated, lifting a hammerstone and letting it fall with precise force. The limestone chipped smoothly, falling in flakes the size of petals. Paaten tried. His first strike glanced off. The second was too deep. Beck did not laugh. He simply handed him another tool. "Try again. Every hand needs time to learn the voice of stone." As the sun reached its peak, the workers paused for food. Paaten sat beside Kai and Beck beneath a rock overhang. They shared barley cakes dipped in date syrup and passed a flask of beer. "You've seen many men come and go," Paaten said. Kai nodded. "Too many to count." "Do they ever come back when the pyramid is finished?" "No," Beck said. "Most don't live long enough." Kai added, "And those who do know that the pyramid is not theirs to own, only to serve." The words were not bitter. They were honest, spoken with the kind of peace that came from understanding one's place in something larger. That afternoon, Paaten helped mark a new series of blocks, guided by Kai's gentle instructions. The brush felt light in his hand, but the meaning of each line weighed heavily. He no longer saw stone as dead. It breathed, shifted, remembered. By dusk, the air grew cooler and the quarry emptied slowly. Men walked with the slow gait of weariness, arms and backs sore, but their faces calm. Paaten stayed a moment longer, standing at the edge of the quarry, staring into the space where silence lived between hammer blows. Menka joined him, folding his arms. "You learned from Kai?" "Yes." "Good. There's more in those lines than instruction. There's memory." That evening, Paaten returned to his father and told him everything. The symbols, the song, the way stone yielded not to force but to understanding. Harkhoof listened, with eyes closed. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought power came from lifting, from pushing, but you've already seen more than I had then." Paaten looked up. "Do you think I'll ever carve my own block?" "One day," his father said, "and it will be yours. No mark on a scroll, but it will fit so well that the stone beside, it will rest easy." That night, Paaten lay beneath the stars, fingers still stained faintly with ochre. He did not dream of glory or gold or gods. He dreamed of the sound of brushes on stone, and of stories told not in words, but in marks meant. For hands meant to last long after voices faded. On the 13th night, the full moon rose like a pearl above the desert, casting a pale glow over the pyramid's unfinished flanks. Its light revealed every line of scaffold, every rope pulled taut, every stone stacked with care. The workers' camp, so often blanketed in stillness, was alive with flickering lamps. Voices lifted in rare laughter, and the scent of fresh bread wafting on the warm wind. It was not a festival by royal decree. No scribe had carved the date. No priest had lit incense in a temple. But among the labourers, those who carved and hauled and served, the full moon marked a private feast. A tradition not born from law, but from need. They called it the night of the bread circle. It came once every moon cycle, when the sky was brightest and the shadows smallest. On this night, each man gave a small piece of his ration, some bread, a date, a pinch of salt, or a splash of beer. These were placed in a wide circle near the centre of camp, on a woven mat laid out like an offering. No overseers were present. No records were kept. Only men. And memory. Paaten had heard of it but never seen it. Tonight, he walked beside his father, carrying a strip of dried fish wrapped in palm leaf. "Why do they call it a circle?" he asked as they approached the gathering place. "Because in a circle," Harkhuf said, "no one stands above the rest." That made sense. Around the low fire, dozens had already gathered. Cutters, polishers, ramp pullers, even 2 scribes, who had removed their scroll belts and sat like everyone else, legs crossed and backs bent. There were no roles tonight, only names spoken softly, food shared freely. Paaten and Harkhuf placed their offerings with the others. The air smelled of earth and fire, of sweetness and grain. Someone passed a jug of date beer, another unwrapped flat loaves smeared with honey. Then came the stories. It began with an old man who'd worked in the western quarry long before Paaten's birth. His voice was cracked and slow, but his words held the attention of everyone. "I remember when they moved the first white capstone," he said, eyes reflecting the fire. "Took 4 days and 100 men. They tied it like a child, sang to it like a god. When it reached the top, the sun broke through the clouds, and the foreman wept. A younger man laughed, wept from the sun in his eyes. No, the old man said, smiling. He wept because it stood straight. We all did." Others shared tales too, not of greatness, but of humour and grit. One man told of how he once lost his sandal inside a stone chute and had to dig it out with his own fingers while his team cursed him in 5 dialects. Another spoke of the time a monkey from the river village had stolen a scribe's ink brush and written, by accident, a mark that delayed work for 2 whole days while they debated its meaning. The laughter was soft but real, and through it all, food was passed hand to hand, never refused, never questioned. Paaten sat close beside his father and Menwi, who had brought roasted lentils in a clay bowl. Sahti, the healer, arrived late and was welcomed with smiles and a wide space beside the fire. Even Menka, who rarely left the quarry, before moonset, appeared and sat in silence, eating slowly, his eyes reflecting more than just flame. Paaten leaned toward Menwi. "Do they do this at every pyramid?" "No," Menwi whispered back. "Only here. Some say it started when the first worker died. Others say it was the overseer's idea long ago, before the whip replaced the word. They fell into quiet. The moon climbed higher, casting silver onto every brow. Then, unexpectedly, a voice rose from across the fire. Would the boy speak? Paaten looked up. An elder cutter, his skin creased like dry papyrus, had spoken. "He carries water and words," the man said. "Let's hear them." Paaten's face flushed, but he rose slowly, unsure. His voice was not strong, but it was clear. "I have no story yet," he said, "because I've only just begun. But I've seen a man shape stone with more care than a potter forms clay. I've seen another heal with song. I've watched a rope snap and the hands that caught what followed. If this pyramid remembers anything, I hope it remembers them." The circle was silent for a breath. Then came a soft tapping of fingers against knees, a quiet form of approval. Paaten sat again, cheeks warm but heart steady. As the night grew deeper, songs replaced stories. Low tunes hummed more than sung. Tunes from river villages, from reed beds and fishing boats, from memories too far gone for words. The fire dimmed, and the circle drew tighter. And then, as tradition dictated, they stood, each man placing one hand on the shoulder of the man beside him. The circle closed. No prayers, no chants, just contact, a silent seal. In that moment, beneath the moon, they were not servants of Pharaoh or sons of the soil. They were brothers of the stone, breathers of dust, builders of something that would outlast them all. When Paaten finally lay to sleep, the scent of shared bread still in his nose, he thought not of pain or toil, but of something far quieter and stronger. A circle, a memory not written, but lived. And in the soft hush of moonlight, he knew. The pyramid was not just rising from stone, it was rising from them. The wind finally subsided on the 15th day. It left behind a silence that felt deeper than usual, like the quarry and the ramp had held their breath through the storm and were only now exhaling. The sky was a pale blue again, the sun rising, over clean lines and clear stone. The sand no longer moved like water, but clung where it had been flung, piled in corners and crevices, waiting to be swept away. Paaten returned to the quarry, his steps steadier, his skin still lined faintly with dust. The air smelled of sun-warmed limestone, a scent he had come to recognize as oddly comforting. Menka greeted him near a fresh cut in the earth. "We finished this row today," he said, pointing to 5 blocks still embedded in the rock. "But first, you learn the chisel." Paaten's eyes widened. He had never been allowed to hold one before, not for real work. "You mean you shape the face. I guide your hand." Menka handed him a copper chisel, its edge worn but serviceable. It was lighter than Paaten expected. In his other hand, Menka placed a short mallet with a rounded head. "Strike firm, not angry. The stone doesn't care how you feel." Paaten knelt beside a half-loosened block, its face already marked by red ochre lines. Menka stood behind him, directing with a word here, a correction there. "Angle your wrist. Let the tool do the talking." He tapped gently at first. Chips flaked off. The sound was different than he'd imagined. Less a crack, more a click, like tapping bone with wood. The rhythm came slowly, but it came. For hours, he worked. Strike, adjust, brush away dust, then strike again. Other cutters moved around them, some offering nods of approval, others simply watching. No one mocked. Everyone remembered their first, day-shaping stone. But then, as the sun climbed and the heat thickened, it happened. The chisel broke, not cleanly, not all at once, but with a sudden bend, then a snap. The copper edge fractured, sending a sharp splinter across Paaten's palm. He cried out, more in surprise than pain, but blood followed quickly. Menka moved fast. He wrapped the hand with cloth, applying pressure. The other cutters had already paused, some fetching water, others checking the stone for damage. "You hit too flat," Menka said, not unkindly. "Blunt force weakens the copper." "I didn't mean to," Paaten whispered, embarrassed. "None of us mean to. That's why we learn." Sati arrived soon after, having been sent for from her tent. She examined the wound in silence, then applied a paste that stung like fire. Paaten flinched but held still. "It will scar," she said simply, "but not badly." The rest of the day, Paaten did not return to the chisel. Instead, he sat nearby, watching the others work. He noted the way Menka tilted his wrist, the way Beck checked his edge after every 10th strike, the way Kai adjusted the ochre lines with quiet care. He listened, and when a new chisel was shaped and passed around, he watched how each man treated it not as a weapon, but as a companion. That evening, as the sun began to set, Menka approached him once more. "Pain is part of it," he said, "but so is patience." Paaten nodded, his wrapped hand resting in his lap. "Will I try again?" "Yes, but not tomorrow. First, your fingers must remember their strength." Back in the camp, Harkuff unwrapped the bandage gently and inspected the wound. "You'll have a mark now," he said. "Will it fade?" "Some do, some don't." The ones that stay, those are the ones that taught you something. They shared a meal of stewed lentils and barley, simple and warm. The fire between them crackled softly, and above, the stars blinked back into place. Later, that night, Menwi came by the shelter carrying a small bundle. "What's that?" Paaten asked. "A gift," Menwi said. "From Beck. Said it was yours now." Paaten opened the bundle to find a worn chisel, its copper edge dulled from years of use, the handle wrapped in old leather. "It's broken," he said. Menwi grinned. "No, it's retired. Like a good elder. Keep it. Remind yourself." Paaten turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of its history. That night, he slept with the old tool beside him, and in his dreams, the chisel did not break. It shaped stars from stone, carved rivers into the desert, etched memory into the face of the pyramid. He had made his first mistake, but he had also made his first mark. The 16th morning was cooler than most. A rare breeze, gentle and kind, swept across the labourers' camp. Ruffling mats and drying laundry hung between rough poles. The sun, though ever constant, seemed to rise more gently this day. Perhaps, out of respect for the pyramid and those who served beneath its shadow. Paaten awoke with the dull ache of healing flesh in his palm. The wound was scabbed now, bound neatly in linen that smelled faintly of mint and soot. He flexed his fingers one by one, relieved to find them responsive, though slower than usual. He expected another quiet day of observation, but instead, a new voice summoned him from the edge of the camp. "You," called a man in fine linen, carrying a scroll beneath one arm. "Water carrier. Paaten, yes?" Paaten nodded. "You're assigned to the scribe's stand today. Report to the upper yard." He hesitated. The scribe's stand was no place for boys. It was where records were made, where quotas were written, where names were either etched into daily praise or marked for punishment. Still, he obeyed. The scribe's station sat beneath a sunshade made of dyed cloth stretched tight across 4 poles. Beneath it, a low table held scrolls, reed pens, ink pots of red and black, and a tally board marked with fresh notches. The scribe himself, his name was Jehuti, was younger than expected, perhaps only 10 or 12 seasons older than Paaten. He had clean hands, short-cropped hair, and eyes that missed nothing. "You're here to assist," Jehuti said without looking up. "You carry messages. You fetch ink and water. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not touch the scrolls." "Yes, master," Paaten replied. The scribe looked up then, studying him briefly. "You were at the quarry, weren't you? With Menka?" "Yes." "Good. You know how to watch." The day unfolded in a rhythm unfamiliar to Paaten. There was no stone to carry, no rope to pull. Instead, there were numbers. Endless numbers. Jehuti recorded how many blocks were shaped, moved, placed. He tracked water usage. He logged the names of workers absent, the tools broken, the time of each incident. Paaten was sent running from station to station, fetching news from the ramp, confirming weights in the yard, collecting marks from the polishers. Each time he returned, Jehuti asked a question. How many sleds moved in the last hour? Who's missing from the West team? Did Menka approve the faulted block's delay? It felt less like serving and more like surviving a test. At midday, Jehuti offered a strip of dried melon, rare and sweet. "You have a good memory," he said. "I try. Trying isn't enough here. You forget, someone is punished. You miswrite, someone goes hungry. Our ink writes the rhythm. Without it, the pyramid stumbles." Paaten watched as the scribe made marks in black to record success and red to mark failure. Red for danger, red for blood. He realized that the men feared the red ink as much as the lash. In the late afternoon, a commotion stirred on the upper ramp. A sled had slipped again. This time, no injuries, but the stone had cracked. The foreman demanded more: water, a replacement rope, and a new sled. Paaten was sent to deliver the report. Jehuti dipped his pen into the red pot. Who was leading the pool team? he asked. I didn't hear. Find out. Paaten ran, heart racing. He asked quietly among the workers until someone whispered a name. Iru, a man known for shouting more than guiding. He returned and repeated it. The scribe marked the name in red. A single line. No flourish. He'll be reassigned, Jehuti said. No one dies this time. But the stone did. Paaten swallowed hard. It seemed too easy. One line to change a man's fate. As the sun lowered, painting long shadows across the yard, Jehuti rolled his scrolls carefully, binding them in. Linen cord. You did well today, he said. Better than most new runners. Thank you. Do you know what we build? Paaten nodded. The Pharaoh's tomb. Jehuti smiled faintly. That's the answer they teach. But what we really build is memory. Memory of labor, of effort, of each block placed. If the pyramid stands, it is because the record remembers every mistake. Paaten thought of the red ink, of Hotep's blood, of his own cut hand. And he understood. That night, as he returned to the camp, the sky was already dark, the fires flickering low. He found his father and Menwi sitting near their shelter, passing a clay bowl of roasted chickpeas between them. How was the stand? Menwi asked. Quiet, but full of noise, his father smiled. The worst kind of noise, the kind that gets you sent away. I think I prefer stone. They laughed, and the sound settled softly around them, as if the desert itself leaned in to listen. Before sleep, Paaten sat alone for a moment, tracing a line in the dust with his finger. Not black, not red, just earth. And in that line, he saw not punishment, but possibility. Because now he knew ink, like stone, could build. Or it could bury. On the 17th morning, before the horn had even sounded through the camp, Paaten awoke to the sound of birds, reedy calls, fluttering wings, the gentle splash of water stirred by early movement. It was the first time in many days he heard the Nile clearly. The wind had died entirely. The desert stilled. That day, Menka had no tasks for him. The scribe had no errands. Even the foreman, as they barked out morning orders, overlooked him. It was a rare thing, to be free for a day, not by injury or punishment, but simply by chance. Harkuf, seeing him idle, gave a short nod toward the river. You've earned a rest. Go to the shore. Clean the dust from your skin. Bring back water if your hands feel strong. Paaten didn't hesitate. He walked through the low reeds at the edge of the labourers' quarters, past the still smoking fires, past the stone markers that lined the path where supplies came and went by boat. And then the Nile opened before him, broad, slow, glistening in the morning light like a sheet of gold and blue silk. The banks were soft, dotted with footprints from traders, oxen, and sandaled feet. He knelt, cupped the cool water to his face, and drank deeply. And then he saw her, an old woman crouched further down the bank, her robe patched and faded, her arms thin as river reeds. She was washing something, a strip of cloth, rubbing it against a flat stone, rinsing it with calm, practiced movements. A small fire crackled beside her, and over it, a pot of herbs steeped in boiling water. Paaten hesitated, then stepped closer. She looked up but did not seem surprised to see him. You're not sick, she said. No. Then why come? He knelt nearby, not too close. I had no tasks today. Then make one. Wash something. Or listen. He did both. She passed him a second cloth, and together they soaked, scrubbed, and rinsed. The motion was simple, repetitive, therapeutic, in its quiet rhythm. After a time, the woman poured a ladle of the steeped water into a clay cup and handed it to him. Drink. It will clean your thoughts. He obeyed. The brew was bitter at first, then strangely sweet. It reminded him of sun-baked leaves, of wood smoke, of rain that came too rarely. Who are you? He asked. No one, she said. But I've seen many someones pass through this place. He smiled at that. Are you a healer like Sati? I taught Sati once, the woman said. She listens better than most. Paaten looked out at the river, slow and sure. Do you come every day? When the wind does not bite. The river has things to say. Like what? She dipped the cloth again, wrung it slowly. It remembers all that the stones forget. He thought about that. How the pyramids stood dry and unfeeling, while the river flowed, washing over memory, over footsteps, over names. Are you from this place? He asked. I was born in a village now buried beneath silt, she said. I married in a village that no longer grows figs. I gave birth in a hut made of straw, now gone, but this river still runs. Paaten was quiet for a while. Then he said softly, Do you think the pyramid will last forever? No, she said, but longer than you. Longer than me. Then what's the point? She smiled. Because it's not about forever. It's about now. It's about the effort, the way your hands move, the breath you take while shaping something that outlasts breath. They sat like that for some time, washing cloth that may not have needed washing, sipping herbal brew that may or may not have healed. Length the old woman stood, brushing sand from her knees. Take this, she said, handing him a small pouch of crushed herbs, for the days when stone is heavier than your strength. Thank you. You'll use it before the month ends, she added, with a knowing look. Then she turned and walked along the shore, disappearing into the tall reeds, her fire hissing, low as it died. Paaten returned to camp slowly, his jar filled with river water, the pouch of herbs tucked into his belt. His father said nothing, only nodded when he saw the full jar. That evening, Menwi asked where he'd gone. To the river, Paaten said. Find anything there? Yes. What? Something the pyramid can't hold. Menwi chuckled. Like what? A fish? No, Paaten replied. A memory that moves. That night, as he lay on his mat, he held the herb pouch in his hand and breathed deeply. He didn't dream of stone or ramps or chisels. He dreamed of water, endless, patient, and deep. And in the whisper of the river's current, he heard a truth far older than the pharaoh's name, that not all building is done with blocks. Some is done with silence, and some with remembering. The 18th morning began, as most others, dust stirring in the corners of the camp, the scent of baking bread and smoke, and the low murmur of waking labourers stretching sore limbs. But there was something else in the air that day. Something quiet, yet unmistakable. A tension that moved like the breath before a shout, like the stillness before the sky opens in rain. Even the birds were hushed. Paaten noticed it first in the way the ramp workers stood closer together, speaking less. Menwi, usually quick with a whispered jest, said little as he adjusted the cords around his shoulders. Harkuf's eyes were sharper, as though measuring the very light in the sky. Is something wrong? Paaten asked softly as they walked toward the supply yard. Not wrong, his father said, but not right either. The signs were small at first. A pot cracked in the baker's hands and shattered in a perfect circle. A scarab beetle, black and heavy, crawled across the path in front of a sled team. Unusual for that hour, in that place. One of the older cutters found a falcon feather beneath his tools. He said nothing, only set it down and stepped back. Superstition was not written in the scrolls. But every man in the pyramid's shadow knew it well. They called it the Falcon's Gaze, a day when the gods watched more closely and mistakes bore heavier weight. Work continued as it must, but every gesture was more deliberate. Every breath held a moment longer. The quarry was quieter, the ramp slower. Even Jehuti, the sharp-eyed scribe, kept his red ink capped beneath a leather cover. Menka summoned Paaten to help carry water to the new cut line. As they walked, he gestured at the track ahead. Look at the dust, he said. It had settled in a strange pattern, swirls and arcs, as if drawn by unseen fingers. Not wind, not wheels, something else. "Should we wait?" Paaten asked. "No," Menka said, "but we should listen." At the upper tier of the quarry, a new team had begun to shape a set of smaller blocks, ones destined not for the pyramid's core, but for its outer casing, fine white limestone, polished and rare. One strike too strong would ruin a day's work, or more. Paaten stood ready with a fresh jar of water, his wounded hand now mostly healed, wrapped only in a thin cloth for dust. He watched as the team moved like dancers, precise, balanced, knowing the steps, but wary of tripping. Suddenly, a shout. A sled hauling one of the polished stones had tilted off course. The sand had shifted beneath it, just slightly, enough to throw the alignment. The ropes went taut and one snapped, and not enough to injure, but enough to startle. All motion stopped. The stone remained upright, undamaged, but the omen had deepened. One of the overseers called for a blessing. Not loudly, just a few words murmured over a bowl of water, poured slowly, into the sand, at the ramp's base. Paaten whispered to Menwi later, "Do you believe in signs?" "I believe in men," Menwi replied, "and men believe in signs." That afternoon, a strange visitor arrived. A priest. He came alone, draped in white, bearing no scroll and no offering. His skin was dark as the Nile's silt, his eyes pale with coal. He walked with calm certainty through the worksite, pausing at certain stones, touching others, whispering beneath his breath. When he reached the ramp, he climbed it, alone, until he stood beside the unfinished cap tier where the highest blocks were being prepared. Then, without warning, he turned and walked back down. No word, no command, no condemnation, just silence. And with that, the mood began to shift again. As the sun began its descent, the wind returned, but only slightly, a soft breath against the cheek, like a hand stroking a child's brow. The workers loosened, their grips, their shoulders relaxed. The birds began to sing again. That night, Paaten sat with his father and Menwi beside a small fire, the air thick with the scent of roasting onions and damp clay. "Who was he?" Paaten asked. "No one knows his name," Harkov said. "But he walks every pyramid site, always alone. They say he listens to the stones." Menwi nodded. "If they speak, he's the one who hears." Paaten looked down at his palms, at the faint mark where the chisel had slipped days before. "Do you think the gods really watch us?" "Sometimes," Harkov said, "but not like men do. They watch for stillness, for silence, for hearts that do not rush." Menwi added, "Maybe the gods are the stones. Maybe they remember for us." That night, Paaten did not dream of gods or omens. He dreamed of a scarab crawling across warm stone, slow and steady, beneath a sky of endless blue. And above it, the shadow of a falcon, not in flight, not hunting, but simply gliding, watching without judgment. And in that silence, he found peace. Because whether the gods watched or not, one truth held. They worked with care, they walked with purpose, and they endured. The 19th day arrived in gold and quiet. The heat returned slowly, the sky a pale bronze in the early light, with no wind, no mist, no warning. For the first time in several days, the camp stirred with a kind of steady calm. After the day of omens, men moved with renewed confidence. The ramp teams gathered earlier, their sandals firm on dry ground. The stone pullers checked every rope twice, and each man passed a water jar from hand to hand with care. Paaten was among them now, not only watching, but helping again. His hand, wrapped only in thin cloth now, flexed with strength once more. He carried a new jar on his shoulder and walked behind Menwi with familiarity, not as a boy merely observing, but as someone counted. The ramp that day was busier than he had ever seen. The upper layers were nearing the final third of their climb, and the blocks being placed were smaller but more precise, angled and smoothed, shaped to fit into the skin of the pyramid, like pieces of a puzzle. The chants of the sled teams rose, early, deep and rhythmic, voices timed to the pulse of the effort. And above it all, the ropes groaned, the sleds hissed across packed sand, and the great pyramid grew by inches. As Paaten neared the midpoint with fresh water, he heard something unexpected, a sound beneath the ramp. At first, he thought it was wind, but there was none. Then he thought it might be the moan of the sled itself, but this was different. It was a deep, hollow vibration, a resonance. And it came from below. He paused, placing the jar beside a low wall of stacked bricks, and knelt. The sound echoed faintly up through the stones beneath his feet. Not loud, not dangerous, but there. Others began to notice. A few workers stopped. One man touched the surface with his palm. "It's singing," he said, eyes wide. The word passed quickly from mouth to mouth. Singing. At first, the overseers waved it off. "Get back to work," they shouted. "Stone hums when it's moved, nothing more." But the sound remained. It rose not from the workers, not from tools, but from the ramp itself. A low, thrumming tone, like breath caught in the chest, like the distant roll of a drum heard through the earth. Menka was called up from the quarry. He listened carefully, knelt like Paaten had, and closed his eyes. Then he stood and called for silence. It was rare, so rare, for the ramp to quiet completely. But now, not a voice stirred. No rope moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. In that silence, the vibration was clear. A tone, not high, not low, but steady. It came from deep beneath the ramp, within the packed stone and wood, as though the pyramid itself was exhaling. Then, slowly, the sound faded. One breath, no more. A murmur spread through the workers, unsure, awed, uncertain. Sati, who had come to the site to check on a minor injury, stood still for a long time. "The earth remembers," she said softly, "and sometimes it speaks." Later that evening, around the campfires, no one laughed about it, no one mocked. Instead, they told stories, some old, some born in that very hour. One man said the sound meant the pyramid was pleased. Another whispered it was a warning, that it had taken too much, too fast. A third claimed it was the ghost of the first stone ever placed, calling back to its brothers. Paaten listened to them all, but he said nothing, because in his bones he still felt it, that hum, that breath. It had moved through him like a river, current, unseen but undeniable. That night, he sat with his father and Menwi, the three of them quieter than usual. They passed a bowl of cooked wheat, soaked in oil and herbs. "You felt it too?" Paaten asked finally. Harkuf nodded. "Once, long ago near the old temple, the ground spoke after the cornerstone was placed. My father said it meant the gods were awake." Menwi stirred the fire with a stick. "Do you think they're watching again?" "No," Harkuf said. "I think we're finally listening." Paaten lay awake long after the others slept. He stared at the stars, tracing their old paths across the sky. The scarab, the crocodile, the boat of Ra. They had always moved, but today, the ground had moved too. Not in quake, not in fear, but in voice. And in that voice, Paaten had heard something more than sound. He had heard weight, not of stone, but of history, of effort, of blood and water and dust, of lives pressed into the foundation of a monument meant to outlast breath. And as he closed his eyes, one thought settled over him like a woven cloth in winter. Perhaps the pyramid does not simply rise above us. Perhaps it remembers. And when it does, it sings. The 20th day began in silver and silence. A rare haze covered the horizon, dulling the sunrise to a soft grey. It hung low over the valley and the Nile, softening edges, muting sound. Even the pyramid seemed gentler, its sharp lines faded by morning mist. But peace, Paaten would learn, was never long beneath the stone. By midday, the quiet was broken. The old overseer had returned. His name was Rekmir. He had left many days before, summoned to the temples at Mennefer to deliver reports on labour numbers and stone quotas. In his absence, the foreman had ruled quietly, methodically. But Rekmir's shadow was long, and his voice carried like a lash before it ever struck. He did not shout when he arrived. He did not need to. His presence alone straightened backs and lowered voices. His long staff, marked with the red cord of command, tapped in rhythm as he walked the lines. His eyes, narrow and sharp, moved constantly, from workers to tools to shadows on stone. Paaten, carrying water again for the east slope polishers, felt it first. A ripple of tension in the way men moved. Where yesterday they walked in rhythm, today they worked in expectation. Mistakes, even the smallest, were now magnified. Rekmir did not see work as sacred. He saw it as exact. Near midday, a stone was laid crooked. It was not much, less than a finger's width, but it broke the symmetry of the layer. The team responsible was called forward. The stone was removed, relaid. No lashes were used, but the message was clear. Under Rekmir, there would be no tolerance. For error, no forgiveness in form. Paaten kept to his path, delivering water, checking ropes, saying little. But in the growing tension, even his footsteps felt louder. At the top of the ramp, he met Menka, who had come up from the quarry to observe the newly fitted casing blocks. "Stay quiet today," Menka said. "The man sees more than stone." "What do you mean?" Paaten asked. "He watches souls, not hands, and if he sees weakness, he marks it." That afternoon, the air thickened, not with wind or heat, but with something colder. It was the feeling of being observed too closely, of breath caught in the throat. Rekmir passed by once, paused, and looked directly at Paaten. "Your name?" he asked. "Paaten," he answered, bowing slightly. "Your hands, show them." Paaten held them out, palm up. One, scarred and faintly wrapped. The other, dusty but steady. Rekmir stared for a moment, then nodded once. Wounded hands should be sharpening their minds. And he walked on. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't praise. It was an assessment. Paaten exhaled only after the man disappeared from view. By evening, the workers returned to camp slower than usual. Conversations were fewer. Laughter was gone. Around the fires, men ate quietly, heads down, chewing thoughtfully. "He's making a new scroll," Menwi said, sitting beside Paaten with a bowl of lentils. "Marking names, rearranging teams." Paaten nodded. "Will it change everything?" "Not everything, but enough." Later, Harkoof joined them, his eyes tired, his movements deliberate. "He's looking for weakness," he said. "And when he finds it, he won't shout. He'll just move you. And sometimes that's worse than being beaten." "Why?" "Because then you vanish without a sound." That night, Paaten lay awake, the fire embers casting slow dying light over the sand. He remembered the way Rekmir's eyes had paused on him, not cruel, but calculating, like a chisel deciding where to strike. And yet, he did not fear it. He knew now what his hands could do. He had carried water, marked stone, held the wounded, listened to songs in the earth and whispers in the river. He was no longer a boy waiting to be told. He was part of the work, part of the memory. Sleep came later than usual, but when it did, it came deeply. And in his dreams, he stood atop the pyramid, the wind soft, the sky wide. Around him stood those he knew, Menka with his hammer, Sahti with her herbs, Kai with his brush, and even Rekmir, silent and still. And beneath them, the stones whispered, not in fear, but in rhythm, because even the harshest overseer cannot unwrite what has already been built. And what had been built, by sweat, by song, by silence, was strong. The 21st day dawned under a sky of pale gold, the sun casting long, soft shadows across the camp. The air was still, filled with the scent of baked earth and distant river reeds. Paaten rose early, his body accustomed now to the rhythm of labour, his mind alert to the subtleties of the day. As he stepped outside, he noticed a hush over the camp, a quiet anticipation that settled over the workers like a fine dust. Conversations were muted, movements deliberate. The overseers moved among the men with purpose, their eyes scanning, noting, recording. At the centre of this quiet activity stood Rechmir, the chief scribe, his presence commanding, yet unobtrusive. He held a clay tablet in his hands, its surface etched with fresh marks. Beside him, a young apprentice carried a basket filled with small clay tokens, each inscribed with a name. Paaten approached cautiously, curiosity piqued. He had heard of the ledger, the record of workers and their assignments, but had never seen it up close. As he drew nearer, he saw Rechmir place a token into the basket, his fingers deft and practiced. "Paaten," Rechmir said without looking up. "Yes, Master Scribe," Paaten replied, bowing slightly. "Your name is here," Rechmir said, tapping the tablet. "You have been noted for your diligence and adaptability. You will assist in the northern quarry today. Report to Overseer Menka at once." Paaten felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. The northern quarry was known for its challenging terrain and demanding work. He nodded respectfully and turned to go, the weight of the assignment settling on his shoulders. The path to the northern quarry was steep and winding, the sun climbing higher as Paaten made his way. He passed other workers, some carrying tools, others guiding sleds laden with stone. The air was filled with the sounds of labour, the clink of chisels, the creak of ropes, the rhythmic chants of the haulers. At the quarry, Menka greeted him with a nod. "You're here," he said. "Good. We have a new vein to explore. The stone is promising, but the work will be hard. Stay close and watch carefully." Paaten joined a team of cutters, their faces set with determination. They worked in unison, chiseling away at the rock, revealing the pale limestone beneath. The sun beat down, sweat mingling with dust, but the men pressed on, driven by purpose and pride. As the day wore on, Paaten found his rhythm, his hands steady, his strikes precise. He felt a sense of connection to the stone, to the men beside him, to the pyramid rising in the distance. Each block he helped extract was a testament to their collective effort, a piece of history shaped by their hands. At midday, the workers paused for a brief rest. They gathered in the shade of a rocky outcrop, sharing water and simple fare. Paaten sat beside Menka, grateful for the respite. "You're adapting well," Menka said, handing him a piece of flatbread. "Not everyone takes to quarry work so quickly." "Thank you," Paaten replied. "I want to contribute, to be part of something lasting." Menka nodded, his gaze distant. "The pyramid will stand long after we're gone. But it's the names in the ledger, the marks in the clay, that ensure we're remembered." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the quarry, the workers prepared to return to camp. Paaten felt a deep sense of fulfillment, his body weary, but his spirit invigorated. Back at the camp, he sought out Rechmir, finding him seated beneath a canopy, the clay tablet before him. "Master Scribe," Paaten said, bowing. "Yes, Paaten," Rechmir replied, looking up. "I wanted to thank you for the opportunity today. The work was challenging, but I learned much." Rechmir studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Your name will be noted accordingly. Continue to apply yourself, and you will find your place among the builders." Paaten smiled, a sense of belonging washing over him. He turned to leave, the sounds of the camp settling into the quiet of evening. As he lay on his mat that night, the stars overhead, Paaten reflected on the day's events. He thought of the clay tokens, the etched names, the ledger that recorded their lives. In the stillness, he felt a profound connection to the generations before him, to the legacy they were building together. And in that moment, he understood. The pyramid was not just a monument of stone, but a testament to the lives and labors of those who built it. Each name in the clay, each mark in the ledger, a story etched into eternity. The 22nd day did not begin with sound. There were no horns that morning, no shouts of foremen, no footsteps shuffling through the dust. Only the birds called out, as if puzzled by the silence of man. Even the Nile, usually so steady in its music, seemed to move more slowly, its ripples subdued. Paaten sat upright on his mat before dawn, eyes wide, breath still. Around him, the camp was motionless. Fires had not been lit. No one stirred. Even Harkhof, whose routine was unshakable, lay awake but unmoving, his gaze fixed on the sky above. Something had happened. Paaten whispered, "Father." His father answered, voice hushed, "Wait, just listen." So he did. From far off, the low thrum of a single drum could be heard, steady and mournful. It was not a call to labor. It was a summons of a different kind, one that passed between generations, carried in rhythm rather than word. Someone had died. It wasn't uncommon. Men fell often, under stone, to fever, to age. But this was different. The drum came from the base of the pyramid, from the overseer's tent. A high man had fallen. Soon, others began to rise, quietly, slowly. Sandals brushed dust with soft intention. The usual bustle was replaced by silence broken only by the low chant of the morning drum. Word came quickly. The eldest architect, Senmut, had passed in the night. He was not a laborer nor a scribe. He had not lifted rope or chiseled block. But his eyes had been on the pyramid longer than most had been alive. It was said he had seen the first stone placed and had drawn the lines that still guided the ramp's rise. Even Rekmir bowed his head. No one worked that morning. Instead, they gathered, hundreds of them, around the ramp, standing shoulder to shoulder. They did not speak. They did not sing. They simply stood. Paaten stood between his father and Menwi, their shoulders brushing. In the silence, he could hear the slow wind pass between scaffold beams, could feel the warmth of the rising sun settle over the crown of his head. Senmut's body was brought out wrapped in white, carried not by priests, but by workers. 4 men whose hands bore the calluses of many years. Behind them, the scroll he had last written on was carried by a boy, not much older than Paaten. The procession circled the base of the pyramid once. Not a grand parade, but a farewell that needed no pageantry. Then, the workers returned to camp, not to rest, but to reflect. Some went to the river, some to their shelters, others sat in clusters around dead fires, speaking softly of memories. Paaten and Menwi walked together to the edge of the scaffold, sitting with their legs dangling over the first tier. Below them, the empty ramp stretched out like a sleeping serpent. "He once told my uncle that the pyramid wasn't his design," Menwi said, "but the pharaoh's dream passed through his hand." "Do you think he was proud of it?" Paaten asked. "I think he was grateful to see it rise." They sat in silence for a while. Then Paaten spoke again. "It feels like even the stones are waiting today." Menwi nodded. "They are, because..." He listened to them first. That afternoon, work did not resume. But men began to move again, not with urgency but with care. Tools were cleaned, not used. Ropes were coiled, not pulled. Brushes were swept over stone, not to mark, but to honor. Near sunset, Kai the line scribe appeared with a jar of red ochre. Instead of drawing symbols for cuts or measures, he walked the lower edge of the ramp and painted a single curved line on one of the foundation stones. Paaten watched him. "What does that mean?" "It's the sign of passage," Kai said. "Used when a hand leaves the work it once guided." As the sky turned orange and violet, a single voice rose in song. An old river hymn about boats crossing into the field of reeds. Others joined, slowly, their voices not raised in mourning, but in memory. Paaten joined too, softly. That night, the fires burned a little longer. Bread was shared more freely. Beer passed from cup to cup. Harkuf, after a long pause, said to his son, "Remember today." Why? Because there will be days when the pyramid seems too large, the labor endless, and you'll need to know that it pauses too, that it honors those who made it rise. Paaten looked toward the structure, still unfinished, still immense. But for the first time, he saw not just the weight of stone, but the lives pressed into it, the breath of 1,000 men, the silence of one. He slept that night without dreams, because the pyramid had remembered, and the earth had stood still. The 23rd day began with whispers, not from men, but from the stone itself. Something had shifted, not in the sand, not in the sky, but in the hearts of those who gathered that morning beneath the great white slope of the nearly completed pyramid. The air was sharper, the light more golden. Even the birds seemed to circle slower, as if they too knew what was coming. Today was the day of the final lift. The capstone, long stored in a shaded enclosure at the base of the structure, was to be moved. It would ascend the winding ramp, dragged by teams selected for their strength, discipline, and timing. No other stone would rise above it, no block more sacred. It was the eye of the god, the closing of the breath, the single voice that would crown centuries of stone. Paaten awoke early, his sleep light, his body already buzzing with tension. Around him, other workers prepared in silence. The usual shouts were absent. No arguments, no jests, only readiness. He was not on the lifting team, few were, but he had been assigned to water-bearing duty for the ramp guards. It was an honor, small yet significant. To witness the ascent from close, to watch the stone rise, that was enough. At sunrise, the capstone was unveiled. It gleamed with a faint, smooth sheen, not pure gold, as rumors sometimes claimed, but a highly polished white limestone. Its edges smoothed to perfection, its face washed with natron and burnished to reflect the light of Ra. It rested on a sledge reinforced with fresh timber, lashed tightly with new rope braided that very week by the weavers of the village. Beside it stood Rekmir, the chief overseer, flanked by his scribes and foremen. His voice, when he spoke, was firm but ceremonial. "Today," he said, "we close the path between man and sky." The teams took their places, 14 men to pull, 6 to guide, 2 to chant, and hundreds to watch in silent reverence. Paaten stood near the second turn of the ramp, jar slung over his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the gleaming shape below. The chant began, deep and slow, the syllables older than memory, older than temple. It did not ask the stone to move. It told it. It reminded the capstone that it belonged above all others. With the first tug, the ropes went taut. With the second, the sledge creaked. By the third, it moved. Up the ramp it rose, inch by inch, pulled with synchronized breath, guided by eyes, sharp with reverence. Each section of the path had been swept clear, each roller checked, each stone beneath the sledge firmed. Men along the ramp knelt as it passed. Paaten poured water for the guards and the rope men, their mouths dry from the chant's echo. He could feel the heat rising not just from the sun, but from the energy of so many watching hearts. At the halfway point, the wind stirred. Light touched the stone's polished face, and for a moment, it glowed. "Do you see it?" whispered Menwi, standing just beside him. "Yes," Paaten breathed. "It's alive." And it did feel that way. It wasn't just a block of limestone anymore. It was memory, breath, ritual, blood, and song, pressed into shape by the will of thousands and lifted by the faith of their silence. As it passed the second curve, one of the pullers faltered. His foot slipped on a patch of loose grit. There was a gasp, but no fall. The man was steadied. The chant continued. No whip cracked. No voice scolded. The work simply moved on. Paaten would remember that most. How in the most sacred moment of the pyramid's life, even error was met with grace. By midday, the capstone reached the upper tier. The chant shifted, faster now, sharper, matching the rhythm of the ascent. The final turn loomed, steep and narrow. The team paused to adjust. Ropes were retied. Water poured on the path. Breath was gathered. Then, the last pull. The chant returned, full now, rising like a tide. With the final effort, the sledge crested the last ledge, and the capstone met the sky. It was placed by hand, 12 men in silence, no tools, no orders, only breath and balance. When it settled into place, a deep stillness fell. No cheer erupted, no horn sounded. Instead, one of the oldest men, a polisher named Beck, stepped forward and touched the edge of the stone with the flat of his palm. He whispered something no one heard, then stepped back. Only then did Rekmir raise his hand, and the chant ceased. The pyramid was whole. Later, back at camp, food was shared. Not a feast. There was no tradition for celebration. Incompletion. Only bread, lentils, beer, and quiet. Paaten sat beside his father and Menwi, their faces still lit by the afterglow of the ascent. "Does it feel finished to you?" Menwi asked. "No," Paaten said. "It feels awake." Harkuf smiled. "Then it is." That night, beneath a sky clearer than any before, Paaten lay on his mat and looked upward, not at the stars, but at the dark shape on the horizon. The pyramid, complete, but never silent. And in that darkness, he whispered, not a prayer, but a promise. "I will remember this day. I will remember this lift. I will remember this weight." And the pyramid, silent as stone, held the words, not as echo, but as fact. The 24th day dawned without urgency. The pyramid stood whole now, its gleaming sides catching the earliest light of the sun with stillness that whispered both pride and exhaustion. The shadow it cast stretched longer than ever before, touching corners of the workers' camp it had never reached. There were no horns, no overseer calls, no pull teams gathered. For the first time in many seasons, the labourers woke not to toil, but to stillness. Paaten rose slowly. His hands, though rested, still bore the deep lines of rope and stone. Around him, others stirred with equal slowness. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full, with reflection, with memory, with the weight of work done. Today, there would be no lifting, no carving, no chanting. Today, they would walk the base of the pyramid, not as workers, but as witnesses. Rekmir had announced it the evening before, one full circuit of the finished monument, performed by every hand that had touched it. From the lowest brick-carrying child to the oldest foreman, each would pass beneath its shadow one final time. Not for ceremony, but for closure. Paaten walked with Menwi and his father. Sahti joined them, her healer's pouch now slung loosely, not for duty, but out of habit. Ahead of them walked Menka, slow and proud, one hand resting on the hilt of a hammer that would soon be buried with him, per his wishes. The procession was quiet, save for the shuffle of feet and the occasional murmur between old friends. As they reached the northeast corner of the pyramid, Paaten paused. The ramp had been dismantled in the night. The long, winding path that had once curled up the body of the monument like a serpent was gone. The scaffolds had been taken down, the rollers collected, the ropes burned in tribute. All that remained now was the pyramid itself. He looked up. It was higher than he remembered. Perhaps because, for the first time, he saw it not from its surface, but from the ground. It towered, but not in threat. It rose in memory. Each block bore a name, not etched, but felt. A story, a bruise, a moment of laughter stolen between halls, a hand held, a cut endured. And in one corner, near the foundation, was the mark Kai had painted, still faintly red in the morning light. a curve of farewell, a symbol not of departure, but of remembrance. They continued walking, tracing the full base, one side at a time. On the western face, they passed the entrance, sealed for now, its inner chambers not yet spoken of. That work, Paaten knew, would be done by priests and architects. What they had built was the shell, the body. The heart would be filled by others. As they reached the final corner, Menwi leaned close to Paaten. "What will you do now?" Paaten hadn't thought of it. His world had been this work, this stone, this rhythm. "I don't know," he said honestly. Harkuf answered for him, smiling. "He'll remember. That's what he'll do." And perhaps that was enough. That night, as the fires burned lower and the stories grew longer, a strange stillness settled over the camp, not from absence, but from fulfillment. Children who had once run messages now sat with quiet pride beside their parents. Old men who had polished stone by moonlight now rested with satisfaction. Even Rekmir, often stern and sharp-eyed, sat with his scribes not to dictate, but to listen. Paaten walked to the edge of the river, alone. The stars reflected faintly on its surface, broken by the slow movement of reeds and water insects. He knelt, cupped water to his face, and whispered a name. Senmut, the architect who had passed before the final stone. Then another, Beck, who had once handed him an old chisel. Then another, Hotep, who had slipped in the early days and bled into the dust. And finally his own, Paaten, he said softly, because the pyramid would not say it, but the water might remember. He placed a single stone beside the river's edge, not carved, not marked, just placed, a small act, a personal echo of the larger one they had all shaped together. As he returned to the camp, he found Sati by the healer's tent. "You'll go home?" she asked. "Eventually." "What will you carry with you?" He smiled. "Not tools, just stories." "That's enough," she said, and hugged him gently. At sunrise, the camp would begin to empty. Boats would be loaded, animals harnessed, families reunited. But the pyramid would remain, and so would the dust, and the lines in hands, and the rhythm of ropes in memory. Paaten knew this, and he was no longer afraid, because when the wind passed through the valley, it would carry whispers, not of kings, but of builders, of the quiet work of men who shaped eternity from sweat and sun and silence. The pyramid did not speak, but those who touched it, they remembered.